Hi everyone, Scott Owens here with Mimosa Research. On my channel, I do detailed explorations of military and modern small arms to give collectors quick subject matter expertise when evaluating potential purchases. I also do more focused videos on shorter or single subjects. This is going to be one of the longer ones. I want to warn you in advance. If there's a particular subject you want to skip to or review, I've left chapter markers in the description for your convenience. My hope is you will find the following information valuable and that I would earn your subscription. In this video, I'm going to be doing a deep dive on collecting SIG's M17 Surplus pistols. I will be splitting this video up into separate, more easily digestible videos in the future, but my intention with this video is to be the single source of truth for the M17 Surplus release. I say surplus because that is how Sig Sauer refers to this release. However, many in the collecting community have also called them decommissioned, because these pistols were actually sent to the US Army, fielded, and then removed from Army stock and sent back to SIG. I'm going to cover the following aspects of the M17 Surplus in this video. I'm going to do a quick history. We're going to do pistol and packaging overviews, what you can expect to find inside. We're going to look at the differences between this surplus release and something like the M17 commercial. We're going to look at grip size. We're going to look at rack marks, for example, here or here. We're going to look at Freedom of Information Act results and how to interpret those. We're going to look at the UID sticker that sometimes appears on some of these pistols. And then at the end, I will give you a link for some additional resources. So with that in mind, let's step into this. Let's start with a quick history. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on the history of the M17, as that could be a video in and of itself, but I will hit the highlights. Of course, we all know about the 1911 and the 1911A1. As the government's existing M9 stock started to age beyond intended service life, there was an increased effort to replace the M9 with a new pistol. New requirements were drawn up, which included requirements that the selected pistol be able to adapt to different shooters' hand sizes, controls were to be fully ambidextrous, that accessories would be easy to mount, including suppressors, and there was an accuracy standard to meet. A big part of the new platform was that the tool was to fit the user instead of having the user adapt to the tool. Hence the focus on the term modular for the new modular handgun system, now known by the TLA MHS. All the big players submitted prospects for the new MHS, including Glock, Beretta, CZ, Smith & Wesson, FN, and a couple of others. In a controversial decision, the United States government selected the Sig Sauer entry as the winning entrant. Total package value, aka unit cost, played a big role in the final decision. Regardless of the behind-the-scenes factors, Sig Sauer started shipping new M17 pistols to the Army in October of 2017, and units started to field them in late November of that same year. By January of 2018, further testing had revealed concerns that the M17 might fire if the weapon was dropped while a round was chambered. SIG reached an agreement to take back existing stock and make changes to the existing pistols, with shipments back to SIG occurring in early 2019. Somewhere along the line, the small parts of the M17, such as the trigger, the slide release, the safety, the takedown lever, and all of these components that you see along the back were changed to black. As a result of these changes, SIG found it easier to simply provide new units instead of attempting to refinish the existing pistols. So now SIG had either a dilemma or an opportunity. What to do with the roughly 6,000 units that had already been produced? Does that scenario sound familiar? In December of 2020, the M17 Surplus began somewhat quietly hitting the market. Collectors went nuts and a boom was born. As a group of collectors, we had experienced the M45A1 decom phenomenon and realized the potential impact this release had on the MilSurp market, both now and in the future. We realized that documenting these pistols, as they were seen in their original state, was going to be a service to future collectors. We started a collective effort to do just that, and I will share some of these resources later in the video. Next up, let's do an overview of the pistol and the packaging. SIG shipped the Surplus M17 in a plain cardboard box with 4 thermal transfer printed labels, sealed with a fiber-reinforced plain brown packaging tape. I mentioned that these labels were heat printed for a very specific reason. These labels will fade over time. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. There is no known solution for this, and putting any kind of a clear plastic tape over the label to try and preserve it might actually hasten the deterioration of the printing on the label. Evidently, the solvents used in the adhesive makes things worse for the label. One proposed solution is to photograph the label now and keep a printed out photo of the label in the box, something I have not yet done personally, but I really should do. Dark, climate-controlled, low humidity environments are the best conditions for storage by avoiding UV light and warm temperatures. However, this is no guarantee. We have one collector who has reported that out of several examples, one set of labels on one box faded, but the rest were fine, all stored in the same area in the same conditions. So it could just be bad luck. Inside the box, we have custom foam cutout with the pistol itself in a semi-transparent plastic bag. 2 21-round magazines in separate cutouts. The standard 17-round magazine is inside the grip. Additionally, you should find a lock, a separate spring that has orange paint on it. I think you can see that there. A chamber flag. We've seen 4 different variations of this. And then, of course, we have the owner's manual. And usually inside the owner's manual is a whole bunch of stuff, including a flyer about what the different spring means, a certificate of authenticity on the M17, warranty registration card, sticker, and then a flyer on the limited edition M17 case. By the way, if any of this stuff is missing, check underneath this cutout, because I've seen them ship sometimes with stuff inside there, and a lot of times stuff like the spring gets kind of caught and lost in between these things like this. So just a heads up. Taking the pistol itself out of the bag. And checking for clear condition. We find the serial number tag. Every surplus I've seen has had that serial number tag, regardless of the condition of the pistol itself. I suspect it was added at the factory after they were received back from the government in preparation for retail sale, as all of this packaging was. The magazines included with the M17 Surplus release were issued, used, and returned. In many cases, there are marks made by service personnel, and the mags don't seem to be related to how the pistol was issued. I suspect the pistols and mags were stored separately and paired together randomly when the pistols were packaged for retail. There are some great mag base plate markings out there, and a fun variation to possibly collect. There are a very few instances of actual issued packaging turning up, where an alert armorer saved the original boxes instead of trashing them, but 99.99% of the original military packaging was simply tossed before it reached retail sale. This packaging is identical to the way that the majority of pistols were delivered to the government. I'll include some screen captures I took of the highest resolution video I could download from DVids, which is the Department of Defense's website to distribute official images and video. There's a requirement to blur out certain things, and my video editing skills aren't quite there yet, so screen capture what you get today. The stills are sufficient to capture what I want to demonstrate, where firearms in the 1700 to 5900 range are being received by 101st Airborne on 27 November 2017 in boxes that are identical to what we got on the retail side, supplied with a medium grip module. Note the large military stickers and the red inspected fiber reinforced tape. Also note that this was both for the M17 and the M18. I'll be discussing the M18 in a separate video. Next, let's spend some time discussing the differences between the Surplus M17 and what you'd find commercially. We've already talked about the packaging of the Surplus M17s, which differs from the retail black plastic clamshell that you would find for most M17 M18s. The most immediate visual difference between the pistols themselves and most other M17s are the tan-colored small parts. There are a couple of other additions that include tan-colored controls like the employee and the commemorative releases, but 99% of the M17s and M18s you're going to see on the commercial market have black small parts. I have two examples here on the bench as reference. Here is an early commercial M18 and a later TC serial M18, commonly referred to as the Overrun edition. More on that particular controversy in a different video. Another external indicator of a military M17 would be the roll marks on the slide. The example I have here is of a commercial M18, but the same holds true for the commercial M17. The commercial version includes the P320 and lacks the additional cage code that's engraved on the slides of the military editions. Speaking of the slide, there are significant differences in the sights between the commercial version versus actual military version. Notice that the optics plate is separate from the much longer rear sight itself, versus on the Surplus and the TC Overrun, you can see the optics plate is actually all one piece, and the separate smaller rear sight sits on top of it. There are other internal differences in these Surplus M17s that make them unique. If we look at the bottom side of the slides and look at the underside, we can see here that there is an area of raw machining. You see that right here. If we look at, for example, my commercial version, that part is finished. You can see we have actual coating in there. And the same holds true for my Overrun edition. You can see the finish that is actually applied inside that machined area. As part of the infamous drop test fix, it's clear that these pistols were fixed after the finish had been applied. Since refinishing the slide could be nearly as expensive as producing a whole new pistol, this likely contributed to how these ended up on the commercial market. Again, the parallels between this and the M45A1 DCOMs scream out at me. While we are looking at the underside of the slide in comparison to our commercial M18 example, notice how the whole commercial line of M17 M18 pistols has a completely different method of rear sight plate mounting. The optics plate on the commercial version is mounted via 2 screws. The extractor must be removed to access the screw on the right. For the Surplus, the optics plate is mounted via a single screw that is accessed by taking out the whole striker assembly. One other minor difference that is apparent is a toolless extractor on the commercial M18 version. There we go. Notice that it is just a plain dot versus the military versions, which have a T15 head machined into the extractor. There we go. Again, in the TC Overrun edition, also a T15 machine surface, as opposed to, once again, just the plain version on the commercial. There's no twisting involved. I don't know what the purpose of the T15 versus this is. Perhaps for more grip, because you basically just push that in order to get this slide plate off. For the best detailed breakdown of the differences, I highly recommend watching this video from Small Arms Solution. This video was made before the Surplus release, and at the time the only thing close to the Surplus was the commemorative edition, but nearly everything he says there still rings true. It's a great video, I highly recommend it. One other quick thing that I will mention is the significant color differences between these 3 examples. They're not necessarily evident unless you have the pictures or the firearms themselves side by side, because color differences between different photos could be differences in white balance and all that other kind of stuff. So unless you are comparing some of the things that I pointed out, like the roll mark and the rear sight, those are really the best ways to determine if you're looking at a commercial M17 or M18 versus something else. Next, let's talk grip sizes. One of the key aspects of the modular handgun system was the ability to fit the tool to the user instead of vice versa. SIG accomplishes this by means of an integrated fire control unit, or FCU, that acts as a chassis for the complete firing system, and whole grip panels that can be swapped out to fit a user's hand size. Sizes offered were small, medium, and large. Each side has some distinct visual characteristics that we will cover in detail, but the most obvious difference is the size marker molded into the bottom of the rear grip. You can see those there. Maybe small, medium, and large. It was up to the soldier to request different size grip modules, and it appears few did. I've heard anecdotal stories from service members about different units handling these requests with varying levels of negative peer pressure. For whatever reason, I can tell you of the 2,300 plus we as a group have personally observed and documented, only 75 or 3.25% of them have been returned with a small frame, and only 24 or 1.04% have been returned with large frames. I'll note that these figures don't necessarily represent all of the small and large frames, simply all that we have observed. The final tally is likely higher. However, I feel like our sample size is large enough that neither frame size is going to get far into triple-digit numbers. What is to prevent an unscrupulous person from getting a different grip frame and installing it to take advantage of the rarity of the non-medium frame? Not a lot, to be completely honest. It's one of the reasons we started our project as soon as we found out about the Surplus M17 release. However, there are some additional factors we can look at to determine if a grip frame is an early release or later. Let's start with being able to visually identify a legit grip from 2017. When these were first released, the only way we knew to visually identify a different grip frame was that the size marker was molded into the rear of the grip. This had the benefit of 100% certainty and identification, but we often found retailers and resellers didn't include a picture of this part of the pistol. I'd try to make some general observations on the distance between the thumb relief and the pinch, where the backstrap was skinniest behind the trigger, and I was able to use that method to correctly identify a small frame roughly 75% of the time. Better than nothing, but that technique failed completely when applied to large frames. Then, once I had all three sizes in hand, I noticed something that granted us collectors 100% certainty when evaluating pictures of a listing that did not include a shot of the rear strap. On non-medium sized grip frames, there is a series of small dots that were apparent on the right side of the frame. I'll point them out to you here. There's one up here by the safety. There's one down here at the bottom of the grip. There's one just in front of the mag release. There's one at the front of the trigger guard. And you can also see one up here at the beginning of the rail. On medium-sized frames, those dots were apparent on the left side. So we can see here, different number of dots, different locations. So starting from the front, we have one in the front of the rail. We have one below the rail, but in the trigger guard. We have one at the front of the trigger guard. We have one down here next to the mag release. Notice there are no dots back here. I reviewed every picture that I could within our Facebook group, and that observation held 100% true, not only for small, but for large frames as well. So this is a large frame, and you can see the dots that I pointed out here. I have an in-law that worked at a plastics manufacturer for 20 plus years, and I showed him the photos of what I had observed. He commented that they were either plastic mold release pins or possibly plastic mold vents. In a nutshell, as the plastic is injected into a mold, a mechanical pin could be used to aid in mold part separation, or alternately, air could be trapped within the mold, which would require a vent to get complete injection. He leaned towards mold release pins, and that is what I have called them, rightly or wrongly, to this day. In any event, for whatever reason, these pins appeared on the left side for the medium frames and on the right side for non-medium frames. Now we had a good method, if the picture was clear enough, to ID a non-medium grip frame. But how does that help us going forward? At some point, SIG must have changed the molds. Later releases of the grip frames only have a single exterior area where something similar appears. They are no longer on either side of the grip frame. You can see I see no mold release pins on either side of this grip module. By the way, this looks more like what I can imagine a vent appearing like. There's a little bit more flashing inside. It's not as clean as what we saw in the other mold release pins. So here are recent 2020 military surplus grip frames in all three sizes to compare against the original three sizes. And yes, I cut open these sealed boxes and bags just for you, viewer. I hope you can appreciate the internal conflict I went through. Of course, there are some significant changes to the not externally visible part of the grip frame. Things like date roundels that you can see in here that have the year. These markings are different. There is a part number that is inside of here that is significantly different, as well as what looks like possibly a revision number right in here. But those things don't help us to possibly detect bad actors from auction photos. My 2022 version of the TC serial has even further changes. You will see the dates are different, and the part number and revision number is different inside there as well. I'm sure they will continue to evolve over time. One other observation I made once I had an example of all three grips in hand is the color difference of the compound used for the small grip frames, which tends more towards a red, whereas the medium and large grip frames tend toward green to different degrees, with large as the greenest. It may be hard to pick up in this video, but in person, there's a noticeable difference. Side note, the recent production grip frames of all sizes tend more towards the green end of the scale and are much closer in color to each other. In summary, while there is no way to prevent fraudulent listings or bad actors, this should give you a leg up on how to possibly identify fraud. Rack marks. Tasked with controlling inventory and ensuring an issued weapon is in the right place, many units resorted to various rack marks to quickly identify that there was a place for everything and everything was in its place. Our group has observed a ton of different rack marks during this release, and a principal part of our effort was to document these as best we could. This effort was undertaken to identify if someone tries to add a rack mark in the future to enhance a pistol. No area was off limit for rack marks, and we have seen rack marks applied as paint pins in various colors in various locations, labels made with a label maker, tape applied, even deep engraving on the plastic frame. I have a couple of examples to show with the firearms I have on hand. My small frame shows a blue paint pin number 20 on the back strap, as well as on the optics plate, a 58 applied with a label maker. The optics plate seems to have been a fairly popular place to apply a rack mark, especially with a paint pen. However, due to the design of the Safariland retention holster, this area experiences a significant amount of contact under spring pressure, and it's a common wear area. And I have an example to show you here. Optics plate on my large, you can see these two streaks here. That is pretty common wear that you will see on anything that spent time in a holster. Other locations we tend to see rack marks located are back straps, grip panels, thumb reliefs, bottom straps, trigger guards, and rails. As mentioned earlier, we have even seen a few with a number engraved into the plastic on the right side up here of the front dust cover or rail. We do tend to see rack marks for specific units grouped together, but there's no guarantee that two similar rack marks belong to the same units. The Surplus M17, DCOM M45A1, and the CMP 1911 releases have brought out a new kind of collector. Traditional Milsurp collectors have been focused on condition above all else, because in a post-war world flooded with surplus pistols, finding that rare untouched or unmolested 1911 M1 carbine or M1 Garand was rare and unusual. However, with these recent releases, I believe younger collectors are finding value in a connection to the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who actually used such instruments. DCOMs and surplus pistols documented to belong to service members who were actually deployed in recent conflicts right now are the hot ticket item. We may see reversion to the mean as time goes on, but the single best thing the current collector can do is to get as much information as possible via a FOIA request. The Freedom of Information Act requires that government agencies under the executive branch of control release all pertinent information about government records to citizens who request it. This has been a boon to collectors of military surplus firearms, as we are able to request information about specific pistols and the government is required to disclose it to us. Until recently, a FOIA response would be nicely summarized with a great breakdown of each stop in a pistol's service life. However, starting in January of 2024, the entire process of small arms FOIA requests were streamlined and consolidated. As a result, the new FOIA response is more information dense but harder to interpret. Now, instead of a nicely typed human-readable letter, what is delivered is a spreadsheet-type grid with somewhat cryptic headers and a legend at the bottom to explain the various columns. What is often missing is the departments behind some of those codes. So the good news is, the process gives us quicker results. The downside is, once the collector receives the information, it takes a little longer and some additional research to get a complete picture of where the subject spent its time. Here are some suggestions from one of our contributors, Josh Clark, on how to best utilize the new FOIA process for the Surplus M17. Use the new form being provided by the Consolidated Office. Send requests to just this one location. Requests to multiple locations create confusion and delay, and these folks working the requests already have access to the multiple systems where this information is being held. Keep in mind that the limiting factor here in terms of information is likely the diligence of the person who entered the information into the various systems, and that could have been years in the past. The new process will highlight if information is being redacted. In the past, this might not have been stated. Duplicate requests also slow down the limited number of folks who provide this information to us. Keep in mind, these folks are often veterans themselves, and many of them are collectors too. This is not likely to be their primary job, but they are working hard to get information out in a timely manner. It sounds like they were crushed by the requests as a result of the CMP releases. I'll leave a link to the new form in the description down below. The UID sticker and what it means. I'm going to let you in on a little secret regarding the Surplus M17 release. Laser engraved on the FCU are a few different markings, including the serial number, which is visible in the window of the grip module, and a data matrix code. You will hear many refer to this code block as a QR code, and it does resemble the QR code, but it's actually a completely different specification. This data matrix code holds the following pieces of information. The cage code for Sig Sauer as a manufacturer, which is 6 Zulu Whiskey Bravo 1, the part number for either the FCU or the pistol, and the serial or the sequence number. Up to and including serial number 2902, the second element in the data matrix code, the part number element, reads as follows: PNO 130-67012-1. After and including serial number 2910, that second element now reads PNO 130-67003. Somewhere between serial numbers 2903 and 2909, the data encoded in the data matrix changed from the part number of the FCU itself to the part number of the entire pistol as a complete part. This was probably a mistake or a misunderstanding that was caught early in production, but after shipments had started to the government. For this next statement, I want to emphasize that this is conjecture on my part, but I think the scenario makes a lot of sense. Once SIG caught or was notified of the error, their remedy was to create a new data matrix on a sticker and place that sticker over the data matrix code on any FCU that had the old part number and had not yet been shipped out to the government. Pistols that already shipped were not given the new sticker. This UID sticker had a black background with contrasting white data bits. Whereas the data matrix that was engraved on the FCU appeared as light colored steel with black data bits. This situation created essentially 3 variations of the surplus M17. Original data matrix code with incorrect part number on any serial number under 290X. We don't know what the X is yet. The UID sticker with the corrected part number applied over any incorrect FCU still in SIG's hands, which would only appear on serial numbers under 290X. Again, we don't know what X is. And lastly, a new data matrix code with the correct part number, which would be higher than serial number 290X. We don't know exactly which serial number the change started at, but it's somewhere between 2903 and 2909. Of the 2,900 plus serials we have observed in our group, I can tell you that we have observed 97 UID stickers total. As with the stats on the grip frames, we haven't seen every single surplus M17 out there, but with such a large sample size, I can't imagine too many more UID stickers out there. And I would guess the total number is in the very low 3 digits, likely under 150. And to drive home the point, remember the footage from DVIDs of the new pistols arriving at 101st Airborne? Here's a screenshot from the B-roll they published of a soldier firing a brand new M17 with a UID sticker. Unfortunately, the resolution isn't good enough for me to make out the actual serial number or read the UID sticker's data matrix code, but we know it had to be under 2903. Additional resources. I wanted to highlight an effort that our group has undertaken to document as much as we could about every single M17 surplus that we have run across. And you can see we have 2,307 individual M17s that we have personally observed and documented within our spreadsheet. Where we can, we have FOIA information or FOIA summaries for a good chunk of these. We have additional tabs on here where there's an analysis of aggregated rack mark information. I then took that information and created a dashboard based on all the information that we've captured. This will give you an idea of how prices have changed over time, what the volume of these have been coming onto the market. You can see really the bulk of them were in January of 2020. That's when we documented over half of the serials that we've seen so far. 812 of our 2307 has unit information attached to it. So far, we've captured about 1.87 million in sales, nearly 2 million in sales from these M17 surpluses. You can see minimum price we've seen, median and average price, and then max price as well. This 8,700 was for a very special set of matched M17 and M18 surplus pistols that SIG recently offered for auction. It was a very interesting situation. Again, more videos on the M18 later. I have additional pages here, including summaries where markings were involved and then the service dates and last unit of assignment. I have breakdowns on volume of things like grip size or the serial range, a 2-digit versus a 1,000 range or a 3-digit range, for example. So just to highlight, we've only seen 1.78% or 41 2 digits, but if you think about the fact that there's only 100 2 digits out there, we've seen over half of them. Out of the 3 digits, we've seen 374, so that is now roughly 37% of them. Great information here on the dashboard as well as the spreadsheet that we have been capturing information on. There's one other additional resource I want to point out here, and a special call out to one of our moderators, Jim C. He has done a spectacular job of documenting every time we find a fact about either the M17 or the M18. He will document that in this Google Sheet to give everyone who has access to the group quick access to all of this information. We have information about accessories. We have information about holsters. We have information about the units that they have been issued to, including links to articles about them, pictures that we find, a spectacular amount of information. And Jim C. has done a great job of keeping up with this and regularly updating this master list, creating and regularly updating this master list. This was his idea, and he's done a great job of shepherding it. A couple of other things I wanted to call out. There's a thread on sigtalk.com with a good breakdown of pictures, as well as on page 2 of this thread, the user Lancer L5AWM, don't know him at all, but a few years ago he documented this detailed breakdown of the differences between the M17s and the commemorative or the replicas, the commercially available versions. I did also want to call out Small Arms Solutions, a great channel if you don't follow him. He has some interesting things to say about the XM17 program itself, but he does do a great walk through of the differences between the commemorative versus the P320 M17. And one final shout out, Sig Guy, he belongs to our group, and he has a bunch of great videos here on, for example, actually tearing down the FCU. He also 3D prints and makes tools to help all of us accomplish this. Highly recommend it. Community. Our group was put together at the moment we found the M17 Surplus released upon the market. The vast majority of us were in a group dedicated to the M45A1 DCOM, and once we recognized this release was real, we created this group on the day that it came out. We have been cultivating this group very carefully. We would love for you to join us over here. We have a bunch of great information that we have captured throughout the years. We vet this group carefully, so make sure you're answering any membership questions. Please feel free to mention in there somewhere that you saw the video. We'd love to see you over here and have you join our group. It is open to everyone, but we do try to ferret out any scammers or anything like that. Once you become a member of the community, you'll get access to all of the other information that we have captured over the years. I have a post here with a bunch of great summary information, including links to the master list, link to the dashboard, a bunch of other threads that we have created. For example, here I discuss looking for the mold release pins, a thread on the differences that I've pinned that we have great comments on over the years, and then information on that UID sticker and the data matrix itself. So make sure you answer all the questions. Feel free to say that you saw the video in the comments, and we'd love to see you over here. To conclude, in my opinion, the release of the Surplus M17s represents a small window of opportunity for the collector to get their hands on the newest actual government-issued pistols, many of which spent time in the hands of actual soldiers both overseas and here at home. As we know, the political winds blow against the chances of this ever happening again, at least in our lifetimes. We may still see some 1911s from a final CMP release, but this is a direct from manufacturer in near issued condition release. So far, prices have reflected that, more than tripling on the open market since their release in 2020. I think there's more growth to be had, and this video should give the collector some key things to look for that is not common knowledge. I hope this video has been helpful to you. Look for my other videos on the Colt M45A1, and I hope I've earned your subscription today. Thanks for hanging out with me. This is Scott Owens signing off from Mimosa Research.